academia. Please welcome. Do you want me to help you?
I will open. So, from the beginning. Good morning, dear listeners. In my paper, I will talk about music and composers, but the topic I have chosen could certainly prompt researchers of writers and painters' biographies to draw analogies too. And the main question which I seek to answer is the following. How significant is a composer's early work, sketches of compositions made in their childhood, adolescence, or youth in understanding their styles? Composers themselves have varied views on this part of their creative heritage, and in many cases, early compositions have survived thanks to family members. For example, Leopold Mozart carefully collected his son Wolfgang's compositions starting at age 5. However, there are also many cases where composers deliberately destroyed their early works. And the Latvian composer Maija Einfelde did this as well, but later expressed it as significant insight. With age, I quote, "With age come experience, but in youth, when one still lacks this experience, many ideas are bolder and more unusual. Now I just don't remember them anymore, and I am very sorry that I destroyed them." End of quotation. Although composers' views on the need to preserve their first sketches are very diverse, the researchers, in my view, are far more united in their opinions on the issue. They will highly appreciate opportunities to get to know childhood or youth sketches of a composer, even if this music is not yet suitable for performance in the concert hall. And as a result, these kinds of materials are stored in museums, libraries, and various archives. In my paper, I will try to explore the following questions, 2 questions that you see on the screen. And I will do it focusing on 3 case studies. They will be devoted to 3 composers, Latvian composers whose childhood and youth sketches are stored in Latvian memory institutions. First, I will turn to Georg Spēlēcis. His music stylistic could be described as a kind of new simplicity with which he has gained recognition in Latvian and international circles. And the composer himself also admits that he was influenced by minimal music, which he had already in his school years. Like minimalists, Spēlēcis enjoys ostinated or variously repeated simple musical units, and it is also through the rhythm ostinato that the influences of the genres of popular music or jazz are felt. And a typical example, not from his youth, but from his mature years, it will be the flowering Jasmine for violin, vibraphone, and string orchestra, and I will show an excerpt from this work. So, it is the beginning, but what is maybe not the very beginning. Spelletjes today, and here you see also the performer of this walk. It was Gideon Kramer, who was his classmate in Riga Emīls Dārziņš Music School. But now I would like to show an excerpt from his youth, Scherzo and Toccata, that he composed when he was a pupil, a student in the same Emīls Dārziņš Music School in the 1960s, and now we can a little compare the stylistic of this work and this early composition. If I didn't know that it was Spelletjes, I would find it hard to believe that the Flowering Jasmine and this Scherzo Toccata were created by the same author. And because this latter work is much more dynamic, impulsive music, where the piano sounds almost like a percussive instrument. And at the same time, it is a testimony by the Latvian music tendencies in the 1960s when a certain liberalism entered music, because during this period, in the 1960s, many young Soviet composers, despite the Iron Curtain, were very interested in Western modern music. However, Spelletjes says, among the composition students of this time, I felt like the White Crow, because everyone was very tendent to avant-garde, but this Scherzo Toccata, it remains mine only avant-garde. Also, he admits that it was not the side of his stylistic that he has developed further. So, and the Latvian Music Museum of Writing and Music also holds several compositions written by Spelletjes during his Moscow Conservatory study years, including a string quartet. Attention has already been paid to the design of the cover page with the spelling of the surname Spelletjes in an original version. And this design already reveals a feature of Spelletjes' personality, which is felt in his music as well: playfulness, metaphorically singing, glass bead games. Also such visualization. Regarding the musical material of the string quartet, we can see maybe the ostinated repetitions or constant rhythm pulse that is common with the Flowering Jasmine. However, the melodic material is different. There is no diatonics and there is no such orientation to the new consonant music in this time. My second case study will be devoted to Richard Dubra. He too, as a composer, has gained also a certain international recognition, and mainly for his sacral choral works, based both on Catholic music traditions, especially Gregorian chants, and once more elements of minimal music. And to introduce his major style, also mature style, not the early style, I would like to show the beginning of his composition Te Deum. This work begins in a meditative mood, and it is based good canonic imitations of two choral groups, and also the organ and saxophone will be heard. And maybe not very beginning, but his today's style. But now I am going to a composition from his study years that is stored in the Museum of Literature and Music in Riga. And this work is very characteristic of the epoch because there is a story. The piece originated in a special harmony class by Ludwig Skarklinch, where students were asked with using some 20th century composition techniques, and Richard Dubra decided to imitate the technique of the Hungarian composer Bela Bartok. When the professor examined this work of the young author, he profoundly scared Richards with the words, "Well, you already want to be holier than the Pope of Rome himself." But it must be explained that Dubra, as a Catholic, had more than once been accused by people of atheistic conviction, who were also in positions of power during the Soviet period. So at first glance, he perceived these words by Skarklinch as a reproach. However, of his Catholic affiliation. However, it soon emerged the professor had not meant it like that. Instead, he had meant that Dubra's composition was even more Hungarian than Bartok's work. Comparing the musical language of the Lydian Mixolydian miniature with the Delm that we listened to previously, we can conclude that it is rather different, although the use of ancient modes maybe is a common element. I believe it would be hard to recognize the current Dubra in this composition from his youth. The music is more vital, pristine, and in a broad sense, secular. Unfortunately, I cannot show an audio example of this work. I can show a little example from his study work Etude, piano etude, this at the same time, but there is no manuscript of this etude, but how he write in this time. And also he preferred more dynamic music, and it is confirmed also about the quotation, a little humoristic quotation about his piano exam at the conservatory, that tempos as allegro, presto, it was his main tempos in this time period. Okay. I have said a case study, but there are no musical examples, and it is today half-forgotten composer Andris Kivilis. And what is interesting, he has a very short life, 30 years, but in his adolescence years he wrote operas. And here we see a fragment from his early opera, Lucrezia Borgia, And I think that mainly it is, regardless of the purely musical value, that could be an interesting and rich object for some research on the creative thinking of teenagers. And then also several conclusions. We can say that the analyzed compositions that represent the adolescence of youth composers are vivid evidence of their environment and in which they grew up and were educated, and of the historical and political background of the era. Meanwhile, the individual, inimitable style of the composers themselves was not crystallized in these early works. But in any case, I think that the duty of memory institutions to preserve such childhood and youth manuscripts is not debatable. And I would like to encourage also composers and their family members to cherish them, because a collection of such manuscripts offers an opportunity to look at a creative personality not only as a genius but also as a living person with all his or her creative searches, doubts, victories and losses. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks. So for your interesting presentation, in which you take the view on young composer styles as an analytical tool. Our second presenter is Anna Dalus from Hungarian Research Center for the Humanities Institute for Musicology. The title of her presentation is Archiving 20th and 21st Centuries Hungarian Music Methods, Problems and Practices.
Thank you very much. And good morning. The Archives for 20th, 21st Century Hungarian Music was established in 2012 with the support of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences Monumentum Grant at the Academy's Institute for Musicology. The aim was to create an archive and research group that would be able to ensure the professional preservation, digitization and research of documents of the 20th and 21st century Hungarian music history, and to promote research and knowledge about the music history of the period and the works of Hungarian composers. The latter is ensured through national and international conferences, exhibitions, the publication of book series, and major research projects that made and make possible to investigate the period and published books on different topics of 20th century Hungarian music. As part of this, we also aim to draw the attention to the international musicological community to Hungarian music history. Such figures as Zoltán Kodály, György Kurtág, György Ligeti, Ernst von Dohnányi, and also their lesser-known contemporaries. Our publications appear therefore not only in Hungarian but also in English and German. The archives currently consists of 4 academic researchers and technical staff, 4 persons. However, given the amount of archiving work, this number is far from sufficient. In my paper, I will not talk about research conducted in the archives for 20th, 21st century Hungarian music, but rather about archival work in line with the theme of the present conference. The model for the archives was the Paul Zacher Foundation in Basel, which is the largest and most important collection of 20th century music. There is no doubt that we are working under much more modest financial conditions in Budapest. Nevertheless, like them, we too have collections with different legal status. The simplest case is when the collection is our own property. Our means in this case that the collection is owned by the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, which as I mentioned, had founded the archives more than a decade ago. A collection can become the property of the Academy of Sciences when it is donated to or purchased by the Academy. Another part of our collections is trust collections, our trust collections, which means that the ownership remains with the heirs, but the archives takes care of the collection. We have a comprehensive deposit contract for 20 years with the proviso that we will renegotiate the status of the collection at the end of the 20 years. The third type of collection is the digital collection. It is important to emphasize that all our collections are or should be digitized. We try to follow international standards in this part of our work, but the special feature of these digital collections is that the documents are only on loan from the owners, and once the digitization is complete, the original documents are returned to the owners. Researchers can work with digital copies. It is necessary to add that the archives for 20th, 21st century Hungarian music is not a state collection, but the private collection of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. Research is free to anyone on site, but digital copies, for example, can only be released after a very strict authorization procedure and can be published only with the permission of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. The archives currently houses the legacies of 22 composers, 11 performers and ensembles, and 6 musicologists. The archives is constantly growing. The scope of the collections is strictly defined. We do not collect individual documents, but rather entire legacies. While we are completely open to 20th and 21st century Hungarian composers and musicologists, irrespective of trends, generations, and research topics, in the case of performers and ensembles, we must meet one of 2 criteria. The performers or ensembles should be specialized on 20th and 21st century or belong to Ernő Dohnányi's circle of students or related somehow to his career. Ernő, or Ernst von Dohnányi, a famous contemporary of Bartók and Kodály, and an internationally renowned composer, pianist, and conductor, is the central figure of our archives. The Dohnányi collection is the largest collection of the composer in the world. In 2014 and 15, his legacy, which contains the composer's manuscripts, his library, correspondence, photographs, documents of his concert activities, was successfully repatriated from America. He left Hungary in 1944 and died in New York in 1960, but he spent the last 15 years of his life in Tallahassee, Florida. It was from his house in Tallahassee that we were able to bring the Dohnányi memorabilia back to Hungary. In addition to the legacies of his students, which include, in addition to Dohnányi documents, recordings, photographs, concert documentation, correspondence from the pianist's collections, we have a large collection of other Dohnányi-related items, especially from the archives of the Budapest Philharmonic Society Orchestra, which was Hungary's first professional orchestra established in 1853. Between 1915 and 1944, Dohnányi was the principal conductor of the orchestra, which was also the heyday of the ensemble. It should be added that the Dohnányi collection is not only linked to the collections of performers or an ensemble, but also to collections of musicologists. 3 of our musicologist collections preserve important documentation on Dohnányi, the legacies of János Brayer, Ferenc Bónis, and Bálint Bázsonyi. All of them have published several writings on Dohnányi, the most important of them being Bázsonyi, who, as a pianist, was one of Dohnányi's last students in Tallahassee and who wrote in 1970 a monograph on his former tutor. The complete background material of the monograph has been preserved in his legacy. And in a sense, it might even be said that this documentation is even more valuable than the monograph itself, which is controversial in many points. Our most valuable collections are, of course, the legacies of Hungarian composers. I should mention here that the works of the two most important Hungarian composers of the first half of the century, Bartók and Kodály, are kept in separate archives. The internationally renowned Budapest Bartók Archives is also housed in the Institute for Musicology and is also an archives of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. The Kodály Archives, which preserves the composer's complete oeuvre, however, is housed in Kodály's former apartment in Budapest and maintained by Zoltán Kodály's widow. Therefore, it is a private collection in which research can only be carried out with the widow's consent, and only in exceptional cases. The access to the legacy is rather limited. The collections of three of the best-known Hungarian contemporary composers, György Ligeti, György Kurtág, and Péter Ötvös, are held by the Paul Zacher Foundation in Basel. Hence, the door of the archives for 20th, 21st century Hungarian music is open to all other 20th century Hungarian composers. Although it should be mentioned that the music department of the National Széchenyi Library, the National Library of Hungary, also has a significant 20th century music collection. Nevertheless, the 22 composers in the archives of 20th, 21st century Hungarian music cover the entire period of new music, and we have the legacy of several other composers who, similarly to Dohnányi, played a decisive role in the history of 20th century Hungarian music. László Lajta, for example, was a composer who followed in the footsteps of Bartók and Kodály, and who also had a folkloristic background collecting instrumental folk music, which later in the 1970s greatly stimulated the famous dance house movement. But he was also closely linked to the French musical tradition, especially to French Le Six. András Szervánszky was the first Hungarian composer who, in the mid-1950s, turned toward dodecaphony and serialism, and risking even the disapproval of the official cultural policy. Attila Bozai and his friend Zsolt Durkó were two of the most important figures of the musical revival in the 1960s. I find it important to talk about the difference between a library and an archive. While in libraries, librarians think in terms of very strict systematization and storage principles, with documents being arranged basically according to formal criteria, it should be remembered that library and information science is now a discipline in its own right. In archives, the ordering of documents reflects much more of a researcher's approach. This means that when we are arranging and grouping documents, we are trying to understand first and foremost the types of questions a researcher might ask when working with these documents. Accordingly, the documents are sorted by type. I find it necessary to stress that the logical arrangement of documents according to their content will greatly facilitate the subsequent detailed description of the documents, which is essential for researcher. In the following, I will describe the structure of an imaginary, ideal collection and the ways how it should be organized. I would like to point out that not all of our collections contain all these types of documents, because the content of a legacy largely depends on the composer's or family members, usually a mother or a wife, thoroughness. I will now describe the principles of arranging from the point of when the collections arrive in their many boxes. The first step is to sort the documents in the boxes by type. The types can be the types are musical documents, manuscript, printed music, photocopies, written documents, a library, personal writings, letters, interviews, reviews, program notes, posters, other documents like diaries, notebooks, personal papers, audiovisual documents, sound and film recordings on various media, photographs, other documents, works of art, musical instruments, medals, and so on. All documents can be placed in one of the 5 main categories. The main groups must then be further subdivided by subtypes, since obviously a composer's manuscript and the printed version of his work, or even his private library, music library items collected from other composers' works, are placed in a separate subgroup within the musical documents. Within each subgroup, the order of items should always be based on the nature of the material. Speaking about composers' manuscripts, if a composer assigns opus numbers to his works, this will be the determining order, even if the opus numbering does not coincide with the chronology. If there are no opus numbers, then the chronology should be taken into account. But here again, the question may arise of what to do with the versions or revisions of the same work made in different periods. Should they be placed side by side, or should the chronology be taken into account with the dates of creation determining their place in the order? Similarly, the archivist must make decisions when sorting out written documents. For most written documents, be it concert programs, music reviews, letters, the chronological order seems to be the most appropriate ordering. However, there may be aspects that override this rule. For example, in the case of a large number of letters addressed to the composer that is not written by him but for him, it may be preferable to arrange the letters in the alphabetical order of the senders and to follow the chronological order only within a single sender. Certain types of written documents, writings on or research material in the legacies, especially of musicologists, may first need to be grouped thematically. For example, in the legacy of musicologist János Breyer, research documentation on Bartók, Dohnányi, Kodály, Lajta should be sorted in relation to the composer, and only within this should the chronology be followed. This arrangement is more helpful to researchers who need documentation of specific authors for their work. This also means that researchers' flair and creativity play a decisive role in shaping the choices made in the sorting process. In addition to the researcher's flair, precision is also crucial in the arranging process. This is even more true for the description of the content of the documents. The detailed description, which precedes the reference numbering of each document and the uploading the data to the collection database, is usually written in Excel sheets like this one. The columns in the Excel sheet contain the following information. Collection reference number, digital reference number, title of the work, opus number, apparatus, type of document, score, piano score, solo material, date of creation, type of manuscript, a comment, whether it is in the collection database, whether the digital copy is ready, who made the digital copy, location of the manuscript, location of the digital copy. These questions appear in the collection database as well. The function of the description and the database is, of course, to provide information for archival staff as well as for researchers interested in the collection of a composer. I would like to emphasize that for a musicologist, there is no greater pleasure than to spend time among such a wealth of primary sources. Someone who can draw on these sources from the inside in his research will have a very different view of the music history. The closeness of the sources in the archives, the daily contact with them, leads to many questions being raised and problems being identified that would otherwise not appear in the researcher's mind. In many cases, it is the sources themselves that tell us what a musicological topic in the field of 20th, 21st century music is. This is why the symbiosis of archiving and research seems to me to be an ideal combination. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna, for your comprehensive paper on the rich collections, work with the rich collections in your institution, and it was very useful for us to compare our experience with your expertise. Now it is time to welcome Gorančo Angelov from University of Štip, Music Academy Goce Delčev. And I will read the title of his presentation in English for our foreign guests, and because his presentation will not be in English. The making of traditional music instruments in the Republic of North Macedonia as a significant segment for the preservation of the older musical instrumental tradition.
Good morning.
Добро утро, Горанчо.
Добро утро на сите. Имам превод и на бугарски, и на английски, така може да...
Много благодарим.
Да. Може да се проследи моята тема. Само кратко за темата. Оваа тема секогаш е интересна, затоа што много често се води дебата еднокултурно богатство или наследство или творби културни, фолклорни, традиционални, до кога ќе се задржат, до кога ќе ги имаме живата традиција. И за мене тоа прашање е много интересно, затоа што сите обрнуваат внимание на вторите носители на една традиција, особено на инструменталната традиција. Втори или секундарни носители, тоа е моја теорија, се музикантите или свирачите, кои што за да свират, за да произведуваат музика, мора да има некој да им ги изработи инструментите. Somebody making instruments по англиски. И сметам дека не доволно ми се обрќа внимание на овие на самите изработувачи на инструменти, особено од државата и институциите кои што треба да ги да ги зачуваат овие инструменти, овие материјални оставштини. И сега ќе продолжам со ова. Имајќи ги во предвид присуството на бројни музички инструменти кај сите народи во различни делови од светот, голема е улогата на изработувачите на музичките инструменти, кои несомнено игра значајна улога во алката наречена инструментална традиција. Тоа што го кажа като да. Изработувачите на музички инструменти поседувале вештини, може и на български, да од одредени предмети од природата изработат музички функционални инструменти, кои со текот на времето се наметнуваат во одредена средина и истите стануваат заштитни звучни маркери на одредена средина или на одреден регион и заедница секако. Покрај тоа што ги изработуваат, овие мајстори, изработувачи со нивната креативност, се стремат да ги усовршуваат инструментите кои ги изработуваат. Дали ме разбирате? Сега, музичните инструменти како предмети за произведување на звук и различни тонски висини, тоа е моја класификација, ги класифицираме во категоријата поусовршени предмети изработени од човекот. Поусовршени затоа што сепак музички инструмент да се направи треба посебни вештини, не е така едноставно да изработи стол или маса или некој друг предмет од дрво или лъжица, сепак станува збор за инструмент. За изработка на музички инструмент, кој ќе ги поседува потребните тонски и технички очекувања на свирачите, на овие инструменти се потребни знаења, кои ги поседуваат исклучително надарени луѓе кои покрај вештините да изработат инструмент, имаат и музички потенцијал кој е мощно важен за конечното звучење на инструментот. Ќе задржам малку за да прочитат колегите. Веќе уредли, се разбираме ли? И на англиски пишува така. Сега мал осврт за изработката на музички инструменти во денешна Република Северна Македонија. За дел од изработувачите на инструменти кои делувале во минатото, дознаваме од претходно објавени публикации, секако овие се претходните публикации од постарите истражувачи и фолклористи се мощне важи да се пронајдат, да се обработат, да се класифицираат како информации. Тоа се материјали кои ни овозможуваат и делумни информации, некојаш целосни информации, за да дознаеме за оние луѓе кои се занимавале со овој занаат. Сепак изработката на инструменти е и занаат, не е само хоби, тука е занаат. Опишаните методи од изработувачиот процес кои се забележани во минатото ни овозможуваат преку компаративно анализирање да се споредат со денешните методи и евентуалните прогресии кои се резултат на постојаното усовршување на секој индивидуалец или секој изработувач на инструменти. Во денешно време, во третата деценија од 21 век во Република Македонија бележиме бројни изработувачи на народни музички инструменти кои денес со огромен ентузијазам и сила изработуваат инструменти. И морам да кажам, Македонија како, може да преведете на англиски, Македонија, не, ова сега ќе кажа, Македонија како мала држава, како мала земја, има еден солиден број изработувачи на инструменти во денешно време.
Despite of this that North America is a small country, there are still many traditional music instruments makers. So this is very impressive.
И тоа е исто во контекст на мојата тема многу важно за да се задржат и инструментите и музиката, а да имаме и број на свирачи.
And this is very important for keeping the tradition and for the continuation of the tradition to have these musical instruments makers.
Значи, дел од изработувачите кои што веќе ги работат во денешно време во 21 век се фокусирани исклучиво на, да речеме, на изработка на инструменти или се занимаваат, и се занимавате со друга професија, не се занимавате исклучиво со тоа. Пишам на англиски. Значи, некои изработуваат само инструменти, а некои покрај изработувањето имаат и друга работа, бидејќи не може да екзистираат само тоа. Не се живее само тоа. Сега во нашата традиција, во македонската традиција е позната праксата покрај специализирани мајстори изработувачи на инструменти и самите свирачи да си прават инструменти. Што е интересен момент, бидејќи во минатото оваа пракса била позастапена, затоа што такви били условијата за патување, за целиот севкупниот живот, ги терал луѓето сами да си ги изработуваат инструментите и нашиот познат етномузиколог Боривој Джимирси така ги нарекуваше и спореа со еден мој друг професор Ѓорѓиев, кој речеше самоправски инструменти, еден термин. Дали во може да се преведе на англиски?
Self-produced, maybe, I don't know if this is the correct term. Self-made.
Self-made, да. И морам сега да ги спомнам во овој контекст. Нашите двајца, да речем професори, едни од првите етномузиколози во Македонија, Боривој Джимирси и професорот Ѓорѓиев. И они двајцата спореа, што е, треба да има тези контртези, спореа дека професор Ѓорѓиев викаше самоправски, а Боривој Джимирси беше најголемиот етноорганолог во Македонија и он викаше како е тоа самоправски, само се прави, што држи теоријата. Туку преводот е инструменти кои самите свирачи си ги прават. Или самите изработувачи, не се фабрикуваат, не се фабрички.
So he told us about some disputes on the terminology self-made. It is not perhaps a correct term because the instruments are not made by themselves, but by the players who use them.
Thank you. И сега, подготовката за оваа конференција навистина бараше многу продлабочено пребарување, бидејќи за музичните инструменти во Македонија има многу пишувано. Иако имаше порано теории, нема многу пишувано. Голем дел од бугарските фолклористи кои што истражувале и во Македонија, и српски, и хрватски, и во претходниот век, почетокот на претходниот век имаме запишани материјали и многу е важно дека тие материјали мораме да ги извадиме, дека некои истражуваат, да не бидеме, како да кажа, политички ограничени, да ги тргаме. Тоа не е етичко во науката. И јас затоа и благодарејќи на професорот Венцислав и професорот на Лозанка и други колеги од Бугарија и од Србија дојдов до доста материјали и од германски истражувачи, и од англиски, и од американски, па и од грчки, и од турски истражувачи, кои што хроничари, кои што пишувале, забележале нешто. И сега, тука се изворите кои ќе ми помогнат да го оформам овој темата. Значи, секојаш се фаќаме за тоа странски истражувачи, македонски истражувачи, странски публикации, кои што ги спомнав, македонски публикации, и морам да ги спомнам овде за прв пат така по-масовно ги користам. Ова ќе сакам да го преведете на англиски, нема да ви проблем. Значи, во поранешна Југославија имаше едно здружение Сојуз на фолклористи на Југославија, здружение на Сојуз на фолклористи на Југославија, кои што имале годишни конференции, како што е вашата, од кои што произлегле бројни трудови, кои што третираат и музичката фолклористика, и музички фолклористи, подосни и етномузиколози, нели, кога се преименуваат и во Македонија. И овде има многу информации полезни за сите колеги што се овде од другите држави. Значи, на овој конгрес учествували и не само југословенски истражувачи, туку и од поширокот дел на Европа, дури американски истражувачи, англиски. И имам овие зборници содржат многу информации од претходни истражувања, од пред 50-60 години и повеќе назад.
You want me to translate?
Да, само тоа дека овие зборници се полезни се за всичките колеги.
In former Yugoslavia, there was the Composers Union, which provided annual international conferences. Не можах да чуя какво.
Годишна една конференција, да.
Annual conferences in which international scholars participated, and they published the proceedings from these conferences, and that's why there are many works on the instruments from international scholars.
И тука можат и колегите од другите држави да најдат многу материјали, пошто има и од Унгарија, од различните советски републики.
For many foreign researchers, this could be very useful, these proceedings.
Да. И многу тешко се доаѓа до овие материјали, бидејќи само се печатале само по 1000 примероци, а Југославија била голема. Само 1000 екземпляри, како се вика? Веци, како се преведува тоа? Само 1000 тиражот бил и 1000 книги. Да, смол тираж. И за тоа се тешко доаѓа до нив. Јас дојдов до сите скоро. И секако емпириски материјали кои сум стекнал со мојата работа како истражувач од терените во Република Македонија. И сега во контекст на претходното имаме и обработени и публикувани материјали од претходни истражувачи, необработени материјали од претходни истражувачи кои што не се објавени, доваѓаме до нив на некој начин. И ова мислам толку не, архивски материјали во Институтот за фолклор во Република Македонија се уште има многу необработени материјали, затоа што нема кој да работи. Да. Огромна архива, пошто во контекст на темата, Институтот за фолклор е, како што е вашиот тука институт, има толку необработени материјали, нема кој да ги обработи. Немат интерес многу. Почна некои млади колеги фолклористи сега нешто да вадат, ама тоа е обемен теренски труд, кој е писан, запишуван на ленти и е обемна работа и затоа треба луѓе. А кај нас не ги вработуваат луѓето, а и не сакат да истражуваат. Тоа е. И јас исто располагам со многу голем собствен теренски материјал. Многу голем. Морам да кажам, кој што иде времето да го класифицирам, да го обработам, и да го дадам некој да го има на увид. Технологијата сега е многу лесна за употреба, ама многу лесно се губат информациите. Современа технологија. Сега сакам само да се осврнам на видовите на истражувања на кои не идувам со години и кои што ќе бидат поместени во мојата тема, во мојот труд. Значи, истражување вршени од фолклористи кои што не се музичари, не се занимаваат со музичка фолклористика, меѓутоа забележуваат некоја информација, некој таму свирал на исто, некој пеел, некој играл. може се оскудните информации, и тоа за нас, како етномузиколози, се мощно драгоцени, бидејќи можеме секојаш да знаеме дека нешто се случувало, ако не е конкретно опишано у каква функција, у каков контекст е музиката, тоа за нас, за мене тоа е, мислам, навистина богатство. И истражување вршени од музичи, фолклористи и етномузиколози, кои подетално описуваат инструментите во зависност од нивната подготвеност, овие информации веќе можеме и хронолоши да ги проследиме кога се, па да направиме една хронолоши преглед во кој регион, кои инструменти се свиреле, кој свирел на нив, од која религија, од која националност. Таа е интересна тема за следната година. И сега, придобивки од претходните истражувања венци, ова ми е на мене многу интересна се момент. Можност да проследиме континуитет и дисконтинуитет на некои фолклорни содржини. Затоа што ние можеме да викаме ово е македонско, ово е булгарско, оно е грчко, ама ако постојало некојаш, а денеска не постои, е големо прашање зашо го нема денеска тоа. Дали било пред тоа наше или некој го донесел, па ние сме го прифанали еден период, присилно или доброволно, и после тоа го нема од традицијата. И ова морам да направам една мала дегресија, нели за УНЕСКО зборевме вчера, защитени материјални, нематеријални културни добри или материјални, нели ние защитихме гајдата и турскиот улум. А до македонската гајда, најблиска е бугарската гајда, исти. Зависи како седиш, како зборуваш. И јас ова го кажувам за колегите што разбират. На претходната последната конференција, кај што и мојот текст беше сличен со заштитата на нематеријалното богатство, ја поставив едно прашање до нашите стручњаци што се во УНЕСКО од Македонија, кои што не ме обичат мене многу. Викам, добро, вие како го заштитите, еве и гајдата, а јас, иначе јас учествував директно. 80% од работата е моја за гајдата. Пошто имам терен, имам студенти што сум ги учил, има живи носители на таа традиција. И јас сум, и мојот син, уште 2 минути имам. Ходи, за тоа после. А ние заштитуваме нешто, што се губи, ние го заштитуваме, наместо да обратиме внимание како да го задржаме тоа. Има библиографските единици кои ќе бидат употребени, дрн, не е важно. Сакам малку да видите снимки од мои теренски, од собствени истражувања. Горанчо Уитхар, бекпайп мейкер. Това са се стари луѓе, кои што работат рачно. Овој интересен човек имаше и перформанс со кукла, со 2 ќеманџи, и тоа са се изработувачи на инструменти и свирачи. Ова е еден од помладите, во Штип и изработува прекрасни професионални инструменти. Тука ја само ќе се задржам. This boy, young boy, and then he's big maker. Значи, тука му држат демонстрација, обучуваат како да изработува инструменти. И ова е еден од редките изработувачи кој го дава занаато на друг. Кај нас, ова може да го преведете, не се предава изработката на инструменти како занаат на следната генерација.
So the instrument makers keep their abilities and knowledge for themselves and don't want to teach the younger. It's a secret word.
И затоа е многу тешко на терен да се работи со изработувачи на инструменти.
And it makes the field work very hard because they don't want to share their knowledge.
Тие мислат дека јас ќе правам инструменти.
Yeah. They thought that Gorancho is going to steal their knowledge.
Тука е еден многу инвентивен инструменталист. Има направено еден инструмент кој што има 3 инструменти во него. Дудук. These 3 instruments. 1, 2, and this is backpipe. От двете страни.
Combination of three instruments in
Да.
one.
Тоа е инвентивноста на луѓето, што реков. Ово треба да пее малко само за крај. Има ли? Одредо најстарите свирачи на темата. Жив. Само изслушам го. Окей. Conclusion. Ечо.
Благодаря, Горанчо, за твоята емоционална презентация и съжалявам само, че не си тук и с гайдата. Our last presenters are Katerina Suglobina and Yulia Bentia from Ukraine. Here is Katerina, and Yulia will be online, and the questions for all the presenters will be after her presentation. The title of her presentation is Music or the Party, or both composers' choices in Soviet Ukraine.
Good morning. Since the theme of this conference is dedicated to archives and art, we would like to begin our report by introducing a unique institution, the Central State Archives and Museum of Literature and Arts of Ukraine, founded in the 1960s. Our report today, actually this is this archive. Our report today is based on materials from this archive. This institution is unique for many reasons which deserve to be highlighted. First, its location is exceptional. It is situated on the grounds of Saint Sophia Cathedral in Kiev, an 11th century church and one of the most valuable monuments of the material and spiritual heritage of the Ukrainian people. As early as the time of Prince Yaroslav the Wise, a large library existed here, which unfortunately has not survived to this day. However, in 1966, the Archive Museum was established in the former seminary building of the Saint Sophia Monastery. Second, the archive is unique in its structure, as it combines an archive, a library, and a museum with memorial rooms dedicated to Ukrainian artists. It holds 115 collections of art-related organizations and over 1,200 personal collections of writers, artists, composers, architects, and art scholars. I must say it's one of the biggest in Europe archives of this type. The foundation for this archive was laid by its first director, Lyudmila Protsenko. She actively established personal contacts with collection creators and their families. She was also involved in locating and preserving the archives of repressed artists, work that was carried out contrary to the official mandates imposed to the institution by Soviet authorities. The director personally engaged with repressed and at the time not yet rehabilitated artists. Unfortunately, due to this work and her overly active efforts to preserve Ukrainian cultural heritage, she was fired on fabricated charges. Nevertheless, the principles and foundations of the Archive Museum that she established have remained key guiding values for the institution's staff in the years that followed. For our topic, actually here we can see we have even 3D excursions in memorial rooms of artists. And you can go to this website and see it by yourself, like visit. For our topic, it is important to note that among the collections of cultural institutions housed in the Archive Museum is a large collection of the Union of Composers of Ukraine. The union was established in 1932, coinciding with the official introduction of socialist realism and the dominant doctrine. It became part of the Union Composers of the USSR. This organization was a Soviet phenomenon that on the one hand aimed to unify and promote cooperation among artists, but on the other hand was designed to control and manage the artistic elite. By studying the Union's documents, we can see that its operations were built on the same planned principles as the Soviet economy. There were 5-year plans for musical and musicological works on specific themes to be completed within set deadlines, as well as plans for works dedicated to dates important to Soviet politics. For example, the 300th anniversary of the reunification of Russia and Ukraine in 1954. Since music in the Soviet state was meant to serve the needs of the working class, the proletariat voiced its wishes in special letters. One particularly interesting example is the open letter from collective farmers to composers and poets regarding the creation of new Soviet songs, dated July 1945. The nature of this organization, which aimed to monitor and control Ukrainian composers, is revealed in documents such as a list of works recommended for performance abroad and creative profiles of Ukrainian composers. Of particular interest in our view are documents that testify to the close cultural cooperation between Bulgaria and Ukraine. For instance, the correspondence on the organization of the Days of Ukrainian Music in Bulgaria and the Days of Bulgarian Music in Kiev. We hope that close cooperation between our now independent countries will continue to actively develop. And now to the central theme of our report. What were the main personal and creative challenges faced by composers in Soviet Ukraine? Based on personal collections preserved in the Archive Museum, we aim to trace the relationship between composers and the Soviet regime, and to what extent artists had to cooperate with the party, largely through the mediation of the Union of Composers, in order to achieve certain career goals, such as having their work performed, securing positions or receiving awards, or simply to be able to work freely and avoid accusations of Ukrainian nationalism and subsequent repression. One of the composers would be Berikivsky. You see him, an artist deeply rooted in Ukrainian national traditions, author of the first Ukrainian ballet and oratorio, as well as music for theater and film. Actually, he is a music score to the film that is in the archive I'm talking about. Because of this and due to his excessive attention to Ukrainian historical themes, he was in the late 40s stripped of the opportunity to teach composition at the Kiev Conservatory and had his works removed from the repertoires of opera theaters. Although Berikivsky was one of the leading figures of Ukrainian modernism, he still paid tribute to Soviet officialdom. In 1945, his song about Stalin was published as a separate edition in Kiev, and he dedicated several works to the 70th anniversary of the leader. He also composed The Hut in the Mountain and Wise Teacher, also about Stalin. In total, he created about 7 such propagandistic pieces. In 1943, Berikivsky composed a large-scale musical spectacle titled Victory Celebration, involving writers and fellow composers, Andriy Shtoharenko and Boris Latoshinsky, who will be discussed further on. It was likely thanks to this work that he received the honorary title of Honored Artist of Ukraine in 1944. Nevertheless, he did not escape the repressions of the late 1940s, although these were, for composers, relatively mild compared to those experienced by writers and theater artists. Party-themed compositions represent a relatively small portion of the composer's extensive legacy and do not define Verkivsky in the context of Ukrainian culture today. Interestingly, within the composer's family, a belief prevailed after his death that Verkivsky had never collaborated with the authorities or composed works at the party request. Despite the contradictions in such a view, it reflects the fact that such works were regarded within the Ukrainian artistic community as, at best, a compromise and at worst, forced humiliation. A contrasting example of a composer whose career path seemed at first glance impeccable is Andrei Shtoharenko. His biography, details of which we can find in the introduction to this inventory of his personal archive collection, is in many ways a model biography of a Soviet composer. He wrote a large number of politically engaged works with expressive titles, like a lyrical ode to October, to Russia, The Dawn of Communism Has Risen, Glory to the Communist Party. The percentage of propagandistic works is quite high. Of the 18 manuscript scores preserved in the archive, at least 10 are in one way or another ideologically themed. Shtoharenko was well rewarded by the authorities. He received numerous awards, including 2 Stalin Prizes, and held influential positions. He served as a rector of Kiev Conservatory for 12 years and chaired the Union of Composers for nearly 20 years. Of course, such close communication between a composer and state should not, for us as researchers, automatically cast doubt on the artistic value of his work. However, it is worth noting that because of his music bears such a distinct stamp of Sovietness, it is not performed often in independent Ukraine. It is difficult for today's Ukrainian audiences to be moved by the specific programmatic Sovietic nature of these works, especially in the context of the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. A special place among the personal collections is held by the archive collection of one of the most internationally recognized Ukrainian composers of the 20th century, Boris Latoshinsky. Throughout his life, Latoshinsky also held important positions. He served as the head of the Union of Composers of Ukraine for 2 years and was a board member of the Union of Soviet Composers. Naturally, he too wrote several works commissioned by the party. In fact, his most well-known work of this kind, the festive cantata dedicated to Stalin, was composed in 1939, the same year he took a leadership position in the Union of Composers of Ukraine. 2 years earlier, he had already paid tribute to the regime with his opera Shors. Nevertheless, Latoshinsky has been an example of moderate artist who was able to maintain a balance between high art and the need to smooth things over in his relationship with the authorities. He was a highly educated intellectual who chose to express his dissent only in private conversation with his closest confidants. Beyond scores, manuscripts, posters, and recollections of the composer, his correspondence is of great value. Particularly his letters with his teacher and friend, the composer Reinhold Glier. We see also them both together. Given their close relationship, Latoshinsky shared his thoughts with the Glier with sincere honesty and openness. One story reflected in this correspondence illustrates just how influential trade unions were in the early Soviet period and how simple orchestra musicians could ruin a composer's career under the pretext of fighting formalism. That was a derogatory term in the Soviet artistic environment used to label music considered meaningless or overly complex. In the 1930s, public discussions of newly written works with composers' performance and open audience became common. In one such discussion, as we learn from a letter from Latoshinsky to Glier, some orchestra musicians expressed outrage over the complexity of his Second Symphony, accusing him of formalism. One young violinist from the orchestra even bluntly told the composer that the music was nonsense. The musicians displayed active dissatisfaction. They filed complaints with newspapers and state institutions, and the work was essentially banned from performance under vague pretext, a decision later supported also by ideologically driven musicologists. The composer was deeply troubled by how much he had to limit his musical language to fit within the constraints of Soviet aesthetics, because for Latashchinsky, the most important thing was serving art itself, not the party, which is likely why he earned his rightful place in the history of Ukrainian and world music. In conclusion, we wish to emphasize that there is art aspires to the eternal, and there is art created to serve the demands of its time. However, not every censored work is necessarily a masterpiece, just as not every composer promoted by the regime is devoid of artistic merit. The legacy of Soviet-era composers in Ukraine reveals a complex interplay between conformity and resistance, opportunism and integrity. It reminds us that historical and political contexts demand a nuanced evaluation of artistic value. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katerina and Yulia, for your interesting presentation. This particular intersection between politics and art is a common past. So it's time for questions, and we don't have so much time because we are now we should be in the coffee pause. So please, short questions, and after that the discussion will be outside. Do you have any questions on our participants? Please, Ivan.
Thank you very much for all very interesting ideas and interesting questions which arise. Different experience and some common things. Usually now we think about a net of communication and using materials and opinions, and now we listen to different ideas about this. Of course, I would like to mention one note, for example, for different relations between Bulgarians and other composers and musicologists. For example, we have part of the correspondence between our ethnomusicologists Raina Katsalova and Dava Bartok, a letter which we published in one of our edition of Bulgarian musicology. It's one of the documents because between these relationships. And I would like to ask, for example, some questions about the archive in Hungary. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. But my question is on the basis, do you have some basis for research questions when you make your archive? Usually there are some structures which are common for most of the materials. Do you have something like this? Because yesterday we talked about this on the material of our archive and how our colleagues now understand the structure and the basis, like questionnaires or some ideas what to do and how to do. Maybe I'm not clear, but maybe some of my colleagues will be included.
What do you mean under structure?
Not only the structure, the archive, we see this, but some like questionnaires or structure, what is scientific, what is not scientific. Do you have
criteria?
Or now you are open and you have different approaches for this kind of documentation?
Yes, I understand the question. Yes, so okay. It is a question of private documents. And yes, I think it's a very terrible question. So I don't know if I can answer that now. for example, in letters, in the correspondence, so there are many cases when it is about personal things, family things, and so on. And of course, we get these documents too. So there are in the archives too. But actually, when we are speaking with the heirs about the documents, then we speak about what to do with these personal documents and if these are free for research or not.
Yes, but do you have some kind of systematization? Is this good for scientific work? How it's important? Some hierarchy?
Actually, I think it's not our problem or not our question. So when a researcher comes, he or she should decide what is scientific.
Thank you.
I'm very sorry, but my proposal is to continue our discussion outside, because the other session should start in 7 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.